I used to believe the worst pain a family could inflict was disappointment. That subtle, crushing weight in their eyes when you didn't measure up. I was wrong. The absolute worst is the moment they decide you no longer belong to them, and they are openly, clinically proud of it. That moment, that irreversible fracture, hit me not with a bang, but with the quiet slide of a white envelope across a polished mahogany table. It was the night of my college graduation dinner, and the setting was the Aurelia, a Manhattan establishment so exclusive it smelled like old money and quiet expectations. My father, Charles Vance, didn't look up from his wine as he pushed the envelope toward me. He handled it with the cold, detached precision of a CEO finalizing a merger, not a parent offering a gift. My mother, Victoria, was across from me, her pearls straightened like tiny, judgmental sentinels. She had perfected the art of the supportive grimace, but tonight she looked almost relieved, as if a long-awaited corporate restructuring was finally underway. Next to her, my sister, Serafina, the true Vance masterpiece, held her phone high, whispering to herself, "She's about to break. Watch this." She wasn't documenting a moment. She was documenting my expected collapse. The restaurant, usually a murmur of subdued affluence, seemed to hush around our table. Forks paused midair. I could feel the invisible heat of judgment radiating from the neighboring patrons, all of whom recognized the Vance family. They were waiting for the drama to unfold. I picked up the envelope. It was thick, heavy linen paper, the kind you use for legal documents or formal wedding invitations. The black ink inside was crisp and sharp, standing out against the stark white. My eyes skimmed past the notarized seals and the 4 bold signatures: Charles, Victoria, Serafina, and even the family lawyer, Mr. Sterling, whose presence on the document was a horrifying detail. The words themselves were a single, concise sentence that felt less like a letter and more like a verdict, a sudden crack running through the foundation I had always, foolishly, believed was there. We, the Vances, hereby legally relinquish all parental, familial, and financial ties to Eleanor Vance. That was my graduation present. Disownment, a formal severing, signed and sealed, delivered over Dover Sole, and a $400 bottle of Cabernet. My mother watched me, her perfect smile waiting for the tears, the protest, the theatrical breakdown that Serafina was so eagerly recording. My father waited for me to fall apart, to finally confirm the weak, emotional person they always thought I was. But somewhere between the moment my finger traced the cold, raised ink of the document and the sound of Serafina's quiet, predatory breathing, something shifted inside me. I folded the papers with a deliberate, slow precision that betrayed none of the internal, subterranean shock. I tucked the envelope into the gray portfolio I had brought with me, and then I said the only thing none of them, not my calculated father, my image-obsessed mother, or my narcissistic sister, expected to hear. Thank you. The word struck the expensive air like a dropped knife. My father blinked, his usually unshakable corporate composure momentarily failing. My mother's smile froze, a porcelain mask cracking at the edges. Serafina lowered her phone an inch, her mouth slightly agape, the surprise visible even through the professional layer of makeup she wore like armor. They were stunned because they had planned for grief, for begging, for confirmation of their superior strength. They hadn't planned for acceptance. They certainly hadn't planned for gratitude. They were blind to the reason behind it. They didn't know who would call my name next, and they didn't know that their action, intended as a final humiliation, had simply made my own planned exit that much cleaner. The papers in my bag were still thick and heavy, but the weight of the family name, the name they had just given me permission to shed, had vanished. Growing up as a Vance was never about family. It was about performance metrics. Our Fifth Avenue penthouse, felt less like a home and more like the corporate headquarters of an exclusive, high-yield investment firm. Every gesture, every grade, every choice I made was evaluated, weighed, and compared to a non-negotiable benchmark, the Vance standard. And no matter how hard I tried, I was always found wanting, coming up light on the financial balance sheet of their approval. Charles Vance wasn't a father. He was a ruthless investor. He didn't ask about my dreams. He asked about my return on investment, ROI. "What's the ROI on your choices, Eleanor?" he'd say, always using the full, formal name when he was being particularly disappointed. I remember when I was 16, tentatively suggesting I wanted to major in data science and computational modeling. He'd simply lean back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers, and asked if that field had the disruptive earning potential of Serafina's chosen path, investment banking and high-end fashion consulting. To him, my pursuit of patterns and logic was an intellectual hobby, not a serious career track. My mother, Victoria, was equally obsessed with outcomes, but she masked her judgment behind a flawless, glossy exterior. She would always purr, "We raise winners in this family, darling," while her eyes slid past me as if I were a smudge on a priceless antique, landing instead on Serafina. Serafina was the Vance masterpiece, effortlessly fitting their mold. Flawless blonde hair, Ivy League grades, effortless social charm, and a knack for securing the kind of high-visibility internships that made for excellent cocktail party chatter. She was the star asset, the one who guaranteed the family's social capital. I, on the other hand, was always introduced last, if at all. "This is Eleanor," Mother would say with that polite, almost apologetic lilt, making sure to slightly lower her voice. "She's still finding her niche." That phrase, "finding her niche," treated me like a half-finished sentence, a temporary placeholder until I could be properly filed away. Guests would nod with strained pity, their attention already snapping back to Serafina, who was, no doubt, detailing her latest charity gala or her impactful work on Wall Street. I'd stand by the enormous, crystal-cut champagne tower, a silent, invisible fixture, holding my breath, wishing someone would ask me something real, something about the code I was learning or the complex systems I was trying to map. They never did. Dinners at home were an even colder performance. The mahogany dining room smelled of cedar polish, expensive flowers, and quiet, suffocating expectations. The massive chandelier cast fractured light across the antique plates, making everyone look like slightly distorted reflections. Father talked numbers, mergers, and market futures. Mother detailed charity event seating charts, and which European boutique had the best new collection. Serafina, always the main act, talked about herself, her ascent, her network, her future. I learned early to keep my voice low, my questions muted, and my dreams entirely invisible, locked away in the quiet corners of my mind. One evening, my sophomore year, I tried to break the silence. "Dad, I got a research assistant position," I said softly, gripping my fork so hard my knuckles were white. He didn't look up from his prime rib. "Is it paid?" he asked, not as a genuine question, but as a pass/fail assessment. Before I could answer, Serafina chimed in with her trademark smirk. "Unpaid, Eleanor? Then it's not an achievement, it's an extracurricular." That was the moment I wanted to scream, to stand up and slam my chair back, to tell them that value wasn't just measured in immediate dollars, that sometimes the biggest successes begin without a price tag. But I didn't. In the Vance household, silence was more than expected. It was the essential currency of my survival. That night, lying awake in my room, listening to the soft, distant sound of my parents praising Serafina for her discipline and her shine, I finally understood. I wasn't the daughter they edited out. I was the daughter they forgot to mention when the cameras were rolling. And being erased, I realized, carries a strange, silent consequence. You learn to build yourself quietly, piece by piece, out of the materials they failed to notice. And those pieces, when assembled, often become far sharper than any judgment they could offer. People often mistake quietness for inaction. They assume the person who isn't demanding attention must not be striving, that they aren't fighting their own unseen battles. But quiet doesn't mean weak. Quiet just means no one in the room has ever truly bothered to listen. For me, in the glittering, loud world of the Vancess, my quiet was my shield and my hammer. It allowed me to operate entirely below their radar, utilizing the one advantage they had inadvertently given me, their absolute, complete underestimation. My existence at the Vance table was a masterclass in emotional invisibility. We always ate at precisely 7:30, a ritual of immaculate silverware and minimal conversation, except for the monologues delivered by my father and Serafina. I remember one particular Tuesday night. Serafina was detailing her summer internship at a boutique investment firm in Zurich. The specifics were vague, but the language was high impact, synergistic alignment, leveraging global assets, disrupting legacy frameworks. Father listened, nodding slowly, savoring every buzzword as if it were a rare, expensive cognac. Mother kept interjecting with proud, "Oh, darlings, and she's always been this way." When Serafina paused for water, there was a brief, painful vacuum of silence. I decided to fill it, not with my own accomplishments, but with a question, a plea for connection. "Dad, the market reacted strangely to the Fed's latest announcement. Are you adjusting the family's emerging tech portfolio, or is that primarily managed through offshore trusts now?" It was a complex, intelligent question, designed to show I was paying attention to his world, that I could speak his language. He put down his fork, but he didn't look at me. He looked at Serafina. "Serafina, explain to your sister the difference between private wealth management and liquid, publicly traded assets within our current structure." Serafina smiled, a condescending, practiced smile, and proceeded to lecture me using overly simplistic terms, as if I were a child asking why the sky was blue. I knew the answer, of course. I just wanted to be seen as a peer, and I was instead designated the student. That exchange solidified my strategy. I stopped speaking their language. I stopped trying to prove myself in the metrics they valued. I channeled all that emotional rejection into academic and technical rigor. I lived inside the university library so much that the night guard, a kind man named Leo, started leaving my preferred coffee blend waiting for me near the front desk. My sophomore year was a relentless stacking of accomplishments, not for their praise, but for my own armor. Academic awards, 5 competitive research fellowships, and 2 different scholarships that collectively covered my entire tuition. I didn't send them the certificates anymore. I only forwarded the bland, official university emails, stripped of all fanfare, simply as a courtesy. The one time I thought I might have gotten through, I was dead wrong. I had won the National Computational Merit Award, top 1% of my field, a genuinely prestigious honor. I forwarded the email. My mother replied 6 hours later with a single line, "Congrats, sweetie. Busy today, we'll talk later." We never did. That weekend, I found Serafina in the kitchen, leaning against the cold marble counter, looking impossibly chic in a silk slip dress and a perfect blowout. She was flipping through a magazine, barely glancing up. "Eleanor," she drawled, using her voice to convey boredom. "You're smart, okay? I mean, nerd smart, but you're not the kind of smart that gets noticed. That moves the needle." "Noticed by who, Serafina?" I asked, my voice dangerously level. She finally looked up, her blue eyes icy. "By anyone who matters, sweetie. Anyone who counts." She said it so casually, as if delivering the weather forecast, confirming my deepest fears. In the Vance family, my intellectual achievements were a novelty, not a threat, because they lacked the glamour or immediate wealth she'd possessed. She then sailed off to a photo shoot for a high-profile charity, the kind where she smiled for the cameras and claimed she wanted to give back, despite never having had a job that required her to stand for 8 hours, let alone understand basic data entry. Each dismissal, each quiet slight, cracked a tiny piece of me, but more importantly, it hardened the shell around the pieces I was secretly building. I didn't know it then, but the AI project that was about to change my life was born directly from that moment, built on the conviction that if they refused to see me, I would build something so powerful the entire world would have no choice but to stop and look. The hardening process wasn't instantaneous. It was a slow, deliberate crystallization, fueled by the sheer, cold realization that their non-recognition was never going to change. Every time I hit a milestone, I'd experience a fleeting, foolish hope, only to be crushed again. A prestigious summer fellowship at MIT? My father commented that it was a long commute. A published paper in a niche journal? My mother asked if it came with a print copy she could display on the coffee table. The armor I was forging was made of achievements they couldn't possibly understand or value, making it invisible to them, but incredibly dense and protective for me. It was during my sophomore year that the real shift happened. I was exhausted, pulling all-nighters, juggling 5 academic commitments. The only sanctuary I found was in the computational lab. That's where Professor Alistair Vance, no relation, thankfully, found me. He was a pioneer in applied machine learning, known for his eccentric brilliance and absolute disregard for anything that wasn't pure data. "Eleanor," he said one afternoon, startling me as I was buried under code, "you have a gift. You don't just process data, you see the gaps in the system. Ever consider applying that to something concrete? Something messy?" I blinked. "Me?" He nodded. "Yes, you. I'm running a small, high-risk research project. It involves predictive routing for complex logistics networks. A real-world problem, Eleanor. No glamour, just pure computational hell. I think you'd be perfect for it." That brief conversation felt like 1,000 pounds lifting off my shoulders. For the first time, someone wasn't evaluating me based on my surname, my clothes, or my social footprint. They saw the output of my mind. I joined the team immediately. Just me, Maya, a brilliant electrical engineer with a wild laugh, and Liam, a computer scientist whose focus was as relentless as mine. We called ourselves the 3 amigos of algorithms. We were an island of mutual respect in a sea of academic and familial chaos. We spent nights eating cold, cheap pizza, coding until the sun rose over the dilapidated campus buildings, arguing fiercely over algorithms, and then collapsing into hysterical laughter when we finally debugged a particularly nasty line of code. It was the first time in my life I felt truly equal, truly seen. My contribution was not measured in social currency, but in lines of efficient Python code. Of course, the Vances didn't get it. They couldn't. The concept was too abstract, the potential profits too far removed from their immediate world of mergers and acquisitions. One Sunday, my mother made the mistake of asking about my schoolwork. I was hesitant, but I told her about the AI project, the predictive model, the focus on supply chain optimization, and the potential to cut fuel costs by streamlining routes in real time. She blinked twice, her confusion palpable. "AI logistics," she repeated, as if the words tasted unpleasant. "Does anyone even care about that? Is this, something you can put on a brochure?" My father, predictably, didn't look up from his phone, which was always pressed to his ear or held in his hand, a permanent extension of his corporate identity. "Eleanor, if you're putting this much time into something, ensure it's immediately profitable. High visibility. You need to leverage your youth." "It will be profitable, Dad," I said quietly but with a new, quiet steel in my voice. It will be industry-changing. He just made a dismissive sound, a low hum that conveyed he didn't believe me, that he categorized my work as another one of my little hobbies. That night, back in my tiny, rented apartment, I looked at the blue glow of my laptop screen. The lines of code, complex and beautiful, felt like a bridge to another world. A world where people built things, created real value, instead of tearing others down or chasing superficial recognition. My efforts weren't enough for them, but I knew, deep down, that those quiet efforts were building something bigger than their approval, piece by piece. They were constructing the very shockwave they never saw coming. The unseen armor was complete, and now it was ready for its trial by fire. The closer I got to graduation, the more palpable the tension became, a kind of low, emotional frequency only I could hear. The Three Amigos project consumed me. The data was cooperating, the algorithms were stabilizing, and Professor Vance was starting to use words like disruptive potential and patent review. Yet, the more validation I received from the intellectual world, the more isolated I became in the real one, the Vance world. Serafina was naturally throwing a lavish, sponsored graduation party for herself, even though her graduation was a year away. It was a fundraising event, she claimed, though it seemed mostly designed to showcase her new designer wardrobe. The family group chat, which was mostly Serafina posting links to her networking events and mother commenting with endless strings of heart emojis, was completely silent regarding my own upcoming commencement. That silence was louder than any of their usual boasts. It felt deliberate, heavy and final. 2 days before my commencement, the group chat finally lit up with 3 bubbles. Charles, Victoria, Serafina. A message popped up. Graduation dinner for Eleanor. The Aurelia. 7 p.m. Dress appropriately. No emotion, no warmth, just cold, bureaucratic orders. It was a reservation for a corporate meeting, not a family celebration. Out of habit, I clicked the reservation link. When the guest list appeared, my stomach dropped, even though I knew logically what I would find. Guest list: Vance Charles, Vance Victoria, Vance Serafina. There was no Eleanor Vance. My own graduation dinner, and I wasn't on the list. For a fleeting second, I thought it was a technical glitch, a formatting error. Then Serafina texted me privately, a curt, venomous little message. Don't overthink it, L. The weight of that sentence was immense. She knew exactly what was happening and exactly what was coming. She wasn't warning me. She was gloating. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time that night, the city lights of my neighborhood flickering against the window. I opened my phone gallery, scrolling through the carefully curated, staged Vance portraits. Christmas, Easter brunch, various galas. Serafina was always centered, radiant. Father's hand was always proudly on her shoulder. Mother was always angled toward the nearest camera. And me? Eleanor Vance, always slightly off to the side, half lit, half seen as shadow in the background holding the camera bag or the discarded coat, never the spotlight. There was one photo that encapsulated my entire childhood. Serafina beaming, holding her Stanford acceptance letter. I was a blurry figure behind her, holding her oversized tote bag. My entire life had been that photo. It hit me with a clarity so sharp, it felt like a physical incision. My family hadn't just drifted from me. They had been actively preparing for years to remove me entirely. The signs were always there. The way Father avoided eye contact when I discussed my research. The way Mother only offered faint praise when no one else was in earshot. The way Serafina always said, "Our family," like the phrase didn't include me. I just never allowed myself to believe it. But now, seeing my absence on that reservation list, the ultimate symbol of planned exclusion, I finally understood the brutal truth. They weren't planning to celebrate me. They were planning to officially, ceremoniously, and legally separate from me. The sting in my chest was real, a quiet grief for the family I had desperately wanted. But beneath the ache, something hard, something unyielding stirred. If they were preparing for an ending, I was preparing for a beginning. And this dinner wouldn't go the way they expected. Not this time. The girl who was always pushed to the side of the frame was about to step into the light, and they would be the ones left in the shadows. The sheer audacity of their plan, to use my own graduation dinner as the stage for my official severance, was almost breathtaking in its cruelty. It had the calculated, clinical logic of a hostile takeover, something Charles Vance would deeply appreciate. But their focus on the theatricality of the breakup meant they were utterly blind to the reality of what I had become. They were focused on the drama of subtraction while I was busy mastering the art of exponential growth. The morning after the reservation shock, I woke before the sun. My apartment was dim, but for the first time in weeks, the quiet didn't feel oppressive. It felt like a vast, empty space where I could finally breathe and plan. My phone blinked with a notification. Subject: Commencement Speaker Update. Eleanor Vance selected. I stared at the screen. Professor Vance had secretly nominated me for the Young Innovators Award and, consequently, the university's commencement speech, an honor given to only one student each year, judged not on social standing, but on tangible intellectual output. I reread the email until the words felt solid, real, and undeniable. A text from Professor Vance arrived moments later. This is your moment, Eleanor. Own it. Quietly. The word quietly landed in my chest like a spark. My whole life, silence had been imposed on me. Now, I was choosing it, weaponizing it. That day, instead of spiraling, I became a whirlwind of cold, methodical organization. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I started filing. Every certificate, every scholarship letter, every research approval, every line of complex Python code I'd written for the AI project. I digitized and physically filed it. I created encrypted folders, time-stamped archives, and a pristine physical binder. This wasn't to prove them wrong. It was to prove myself right. I knew, with a certainty that calmed my trembling hands, that my work meant something, and soon someone with real power was going to recognize it. Maya and Liam burst into my apartment that evening, arms full of Thai takeout and pure, unfiltered enthusiasm. The optimization model is stable," Liam announced, nearly vibrating. "The latest simulations hit a 14.3% efficiency gain, factoring in real-world variables. That's industry-changing, you hear me? Industry-changing." Maya nearly danced across my tiny living room. "We're presenting next week at the symposium. You won't believe the attendance list. Companies are watching, Eleanor. Big names." I told them about the dinner, the reservation list, the deliberate omission of my name. Maya's fork froze midair. "They didn't include you in your own graduation dinner," she sputtered. Liam muttered a curse word. "Your family is clinically insane." I laughed softly, a sound of pure, bitter relief. For once, I didn't have to defend them. For once, my objective reality was validated by people who mattered. Later, after they left, I sat by the window, the rain streaking the glass like a strange, muted applause. My life no longer looked like a series of failures in my parents' eyes. It looked like a series of quiet, deliberate victories they had chosen to ignore. And that, more than any $1 million deal, was my true power. I rearranged my small, minimalist desk with almost ceremonial precision. Laptop centered, folders stacked by importance, project notes organized like stepping stones toward something great. Then I took the final step. I pulled out a sleek, battleship gray portfolio I had bought years ago but never used because I felt I had nothing worthy to put inside it. Now it would hold my future. I slipped 2 documents into it, the signed agreement from the university regarding the commencement speech, and the final, notarized patent application for the core AI algorithm. As midnight approached, I whispered to the rain-slicked window, "If they expect me to crumble, they haven't been paying attention." And they never had. But the world was about to, because quietly, very quietly, Eleanor Vance had started to rise. The week leading up to the university's annual startup symposium felt like standing on the edge of a sheer cliff. Terrifying, thrilling, and completely irreversible. Every single evening, I rehearsed the presentation until my voice cracked and my data models blurred into a digital haze. I wasn't just presenting an algorithm. I was presenting my life's thesis, the definitive proof that all my silent effort had culminated in something revolutionary. The code had to be flawless, the visuals compelling, the delivery impeccable. On the morning of the event, Maya handed me a coffee, her hands shaking slightly. "You ready to change your life, Elle?" Liam added, "Or at least destroy the logistics market as we know it." I managed a small smile, but my stomach was a knotted wreck of anxiety and fierce determination. Standing backstage, I could hear the previous team's pitch, a decent, if uninspired app idea. The applause that followed was polite, lukewarm. It was the sound of participation, not innovation. When Professor Vance's booming voice called my name, the room felt oddly quiet, the kind of stillness that precedes a great storm. I walked to the center of the brightly lit stage, the projector light warm on my face, and clicked to the first slide. "I'm Eleanor Vance," I began, my voice steady, betraying none of the internal chaos. "And this is RouteMind, a system that doesn't just predict routes. It predicts profit, sustainability, and efficiency." I showed the graphs, the complex network simulations, and the staggering cost reductions. The room remained silent, a sea of tailored suits and skeptical faces. But then I reached the live demo. This was the moment of truth. On the screen, a real-time logistics map of a major shipping company, using historical data, began to optimize its future routes. The numbers updated dynamically. Fuel cost down 14.3%. Delivery time down 11.8%. Error margin near zero. The room didn't cheer. It held its breath. The silence that followed wasn't polite. It was heavy, electric, the sound of an entire industry's worth of executives realizing their established metrics had just been shattered. Then, slowly at first, the applause began. It wasn't polite or lukewarm. It was loud, real, and sustained. When the house lights came back up, a tall, impeccably dressed man in a charcoal suit stood near the stage. He wasn't applauding, but his gaze was fixed on me with an intensity one couldn't decipher. He waited patiently for the smaller crowd of admirers to clear before approaching the podium, parting the crowd with the subtle authority of someone accustomed to being followed, not led. "You built this." His voice was deep, steady, resonating with a rare, quiet power. "Every line of code," I confirmed, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. He extended a hand. "Elias Thorne, CEO of Apex Logistics." My breath caught. Apex Logistics. They weren't just big. They were a global behemoth, one of the most technologically advanced logistics companies in the world. They were the ones who didn't need a 14% efficiency gain, yet they were the ones who would recognize its true value. "Your model is disruptive, Ms. Vance," he said, holding my gaze. "But more importantly, it's fair. It prioritizes efficiency without exploiting the human element, the drivers, the maintenance teams. It's smart, Eleanor, but it's also ethical. No one in my family had ever praised me for being seen. They praised Serafina for what she looked like and what she achieved on paper. But this stranger, this industry titan, was praising the integrity of my thinking. We talked for only 5 minutes, but in that time he understood more about me than my parents had in 20 years. We agreed to meet again the next afternoon. That single handshake, that brief moment of genuine validation, felt like the first time I had truly won something that mattered. The dinner was tomorrow, the disownment was pending, but I already knew that my quiet existence was about to become very, very loud. The next afternoon, the meeting with Elias Thorne was less a business discussion and more an in-depth technical interview. He didn't ask about my background or my parents. He asked about my future state. He wanted to know how I planned to scale the model, how I would future-proof the algorithms, and what my timeline was for integrating AI-driven predictive maintenance. He spoke my language, the language of logic, system design, and optimization. It was intoxicating. By our third meeting, held discreetly in his private conference room high above Midtown, the conversation shifted from technicalities to strategy. He wasn't just interested in the product, he was interested in the team. He saw the genius in Maya and Liam and the leadership in me. At the end of that meeting, Elias Thorne slid a folder across the polished glass table. The action was eerily familiar, echoing the cold, corporate way my father would later slide the disownment papers across the dinner table. But the contents were utterly different. Inside the Apex Logistics folder was a letter of intent. It outlined the acquisition of our technology, our AI algorithm, our data architecture, and all related intellectual property for a total sum of $15.5 million. And that wasn't all. The second page was an employment contract. Director of Optimization, a senior executive role at one of the world's most dominant logistics firms, reporting directly to the CEO, effective immediately after graduation. I stared at the number, the figure blurring for a moment. $15.5 million. It was a staggering amount, a figure that eclipsed any single deal my father had ever publicly bragged about. My hands trembled, not from nerves, but from the sudden, profound finality of my financial independence. I barely whispered, "Why me, Mr. Thorne? Why offer this role to a new graduate?" Elias Thorne leaned forward, his gaze direct and piercing. "Because you built something brilliant while the people around you failed to notice, Eleanor. And the conviction it takes to pursue something that complex, that revolutionary in complete silence, tells me everything I need to know about your focus and your character. I don't hire pedigree, I hire paradigm shifters." His words struck deeper than the money. No one had ever framed my struggle, my forced invisibility, as a strength. He saw the quiet resilience, the relentless, under-the-radar work ethic that the Van Cess had tried to crush. When I finally lifted the gold pen and signed the letter of intent, a profound wave of calm washed over me. It wasn't the triumph of pride, it was the quiet balance of self-possession. I had built this life from silence, and now it was documented, sealed, and undeniable. The final piece of preparation was complete. My family planned to hand me their letter tomorrow, intending to end my financial and emotional existence in their world. But I already had my own letter, my own contract, and it was worth far more than the petty rejection they planned to deliver. I had the means to stand entirely on my own, not because I was allowed to, but because I had earned the right. The night before the official graduation dinner felt strangely suspended, a moment of stillness before the inevitable collision. The city outside my apartment hummed with the aggressive vitality of a New York summer, but inside I was in a state of hyperfocus, reviewing the evidence. I had the official documents spread across my desk, the signed letter of intent, the acquisition agreement, the valuation summary provided by Apex Logistics legal team, and the employment contract, all stamped, notarized, and entirely real. They were the very kind of papers my father worshipped, the tangible proof of corporate dominance, except these didn't come from a legacy firm or a family trust. They came from me. I slipped each document into the sleek, battleship gray portfolio I'd purchased years ago. It felt heavy now, not just with paper, but with the weight of my future. My hands moved slowly, almost ceremonially, as if I were preparing the evidence for a trial where I wasn't the accused, but the star witness to my own rebirth. My phone buzzed. A message from Mother. "See you tomorrow, darling. Big night." I stared at the words, the false sweetness tasting like ash. Big night. She wasn't wrong, but she couldn't possibly imagine the scope of the night I had planned. I laid out my outfit, a navy silk blend blazer, a crisp white button-down and subtle, intentional jewelry. No flash, no drama, just professional, unshakable confidence. The kind of look that declared, "I don't need your approval." I brought my own. Then came the harder, more emotional preparation. I opened the drawer beside my bed and pulled out an old birthday card for my 10th birthday. The front had a faded, glittery shooting star. Inside, in my mother's perfect looping script, "To our little dreamer." I used to treasure that card, that nickname. But I realized they never loved the determined woman I became. They loved the idea of a dreamy, compliant child who would grow up to marry well and attend the right charity lunches. I placed the card next to the gray portfolio, past fantasy beside present proof. A loud knock startled me. Maya and Liam. They came bearing late-night snacks and sheer moral support. "We're not letting you freak out alone," Maya declared, barging in with a box of donuts. Liam tossed a bag of chips onto the counter. "You good, Elle? You look terrifyingly calm." I nodded. "Tomorrow, they're going to show their true colors, and I'm going to show them mine." Liam snorted. "They haven't already? Your family's reality distortion field is legendary." We laughed, but the ache beneath the humor was still there. When they left, I dimmed the lights and returned to the window. The city glowed, warm, indifferent, alive. The view made me realize something fundamental. My family had never been the center of my world. They were just the loudest, most persistent noise in it. And tomorrow, that noise would finally, blessedly, go quiet. I picked up the heavy gray portfolio, holding it close to my chest for a moment. Let them hand me their letter. Let them think they are ending something. In less than 24 hours, they would discover the uncomfortable truth. Eleanor Vance no longer needed a family name to validate her. She had built a future that stood entirely on its own. Strong, documented, undeniable. The storm was coming, but for the first time, I wasn't the one who would be swept away. I was the one who controlled the wind. Graduation day was a whirlwind of black robes, forced smiles, and the profound, electric realization that I was utterly free. By evening, the feeling of elation had been replaced by a quiet, focused determination as I stood in front of the Aurelia. The restaurant was exactly as I remembered. White tablecloths, gold-plated chandeliers, and a soft, expensive violin piece playing in the background, just loud enough to necessitate a hushed conversation. I smoothed my blazer, checked my reflection, intentional, professional, unreadable, and walked in. The hostess looked up, scanning her list. "Reservation, Vance party," I stated, my voice clear. She hesitated, her eyes flicking back down to the ledger. As expected, my name was not there, but she forced a polished smile. "Right this way, Ms. Vance." The slight pause in her voice was a confirmation of my deliberate exclusion. The dining room glowed under the chandelier's light, which resembled frozen, dripping waterfalls of gold. In the far corner, under that halo of expensive illumination, my family sat. Charles raised a hand with the fake, expansive warmth he usually reserved for major donors. Victoria beamed, looking every inch the political spouse. Serafina was already angled toward the door, her phone held discreetly, ready to record the inevitable drama. I walked toward them slowly, each step a conscious choice. "Eleanor, darling," Mother cooed, standing to air-kiss the space beside my cheek, a gesture as hollow as her congratulations. Such a big night. Sit, Father commanded, his tone brusque, already moving to the main event. I lowered myself into the chair. My hands were folded in my lap, steady, utterly unreadable. A waiter materialized instantly, placing a pristine white envelope beside my plate. I didn't need to open it. I knew its contents and its purpose. But Father needed his performance, his CEO moment of cutting dead weight. He cleared his throat, the sound a dramatic punctuation mark. "Eleanor," he began, his voice lowered to a confidential, corporate hush. "We've been thinking about the future." Mother chimed in, her pearls catching the light like tiny, cold eyes. "Your choices haven't aligned with the family's direction." Serafina offered the final, sharp cut, a false expression of regret painted on her face. "We just want what's best for all of us." She lifted her phone slightly higher, whispering, "This is it. She's going to break." The entire restaurant, sensing the high-stakes personal drama, fell into a hush. I picked up the envelope. The paper was heavy, formal, and legally binding. Inside was the complete disownment document. For signatures, every tie cut, every debt severed, every connection erased. The gift that sealed my fate. I set the paper down gently. Mother leaned forward, eager. "Eleanor, say something." So I did. "Thank you." The word hit the silence like a gunshot. Father blinked again, his jaw tightening in disbelief. Mother stiffened. Serafina's phone wavered, momentarily out of focus. "Excuse me?" Father asked, his voice a low growl of confusion. I said, "Thank you, Father." I folded the document once, twice, calmly and deliberately. This actually makes things considerably easier. Their confusion was immediate, delicious, and utterly disarming. Before they could recover, I reached into my bag and placed my portfolio on the table. Gray, clean, heavy. My mother frowned. "What is that, Eleanor? Some kind of joke?" I opened the portfolio, turning the first page toward them. It gleamed under the chandelier's unforgiving light. Apex Logistics Acquisition Agreement. $15.5 million. Eleanor Vance, Director of Optimization. Serafina gasped so loudly that heads definitively turned. My father leaned closer, disbelief tightening the skin around his eyes. This isn't real. This is some kind of stunt." "It's very real," I said softly, allowing the sound of the word to sink in. Mother's voice was a cracked whisper. "You sold something without us." "I built something," I corrected, my gaze fixed on my father, "and then I sold it." Serafina was flipping through the pages now, her breath quick and shallow. "Elias Thorne? The Elias Thorne? He signed this." I gently tapped the corner of the contract. "Look closely, Serafina. That's his signature, and that is my new title." My father's face was bloodless. He looked at me, not with cold disapproval, but with the shock and betrayal one reserves for a stranger who has just dramatically outperformed you. "Eleanor, why didn't you tell us?" I stared at him, letting the silence provide the only answer he deserved. "Because you never asked. Because you never cared. Because you never believed." But all I finally said was, "You taught me results mattered, Father. So here are my results." My mother shook her head in panicked disbelief. "We didn't know. We didn't know you were doing all this." "You never looked," I repeated. Father swallowed hard, the corporate facade crumbling. "Eleanor, perhaps we should reconsider the paperwork." I shut the gray portfolio with a soft, final click that was louder than any shout. "Keep your letter, Father," I said, sliding the disownment papers back across the table. "I already have my own." The irony hung in the air like shattered glass. Serafina's phone was no longer recording. She had slowly lowered it, witnessing her own defeat. For the first time in my life, Charles Vance had no words. Victoria had no smile. Serafina had no audience. I rose to my feet. "This family," I said, my voice steady, completely devoid of emotion, never saw me, but the world did. I turned and walked away. Behind me, I heard my mother whisper, her voice thin and high, "What do we do?" And my father's whispered reply, filled with a crushing realization of his own impotence, "Nothing. There's absolutely nothing we can do." Their silence followed me across the restaurant, not heavy or painful, but satisfying in its finality. Stepping out of the Aurelia and onto the Manhattan sidewalk was like stepping into a different climate. The warm, late spring air felt crisp and clean, as if the world had suddenly shifted by a few degrees, and only I noticed the change. I stood there for a long moment, letting the cool breeze wash over me, grounding me after the emotional storm I had just executed. It was over. I had faced them, not with anger, but with proof, and the proof was worth $15.5 million. My phone buzzed immediately. A message from Serafina. "Eleanor, please. Can we talk?" I didn't know they were going to do that. That wasn't supposed to happen. I stared at the message, the dots blinking as she typed more, desperate for redemption or, more likely, damage control. I turned my phone face down in my blazer pocket. For the first time, silence was not a burden imposed on me. It was a choice I embraced. I decided not to take a cab. I walked home slowly, each step feeling lighter than the last. The city hummed around me. Delivery trucks, distant sirens, the honest, unedited sounds of life in motion. Nothing like the artificial perfection of the Vance world I had just left. When I reached my apartment building, the hallway lights flickered softly. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and exhaled a long, steady, profound breath I felt like I had been holding my entire life. I placed my bag on the counter and set the heavy gray portfolio beside it. The documents inside, the contracts, the titles, the money, were pristine, untouched by the chaos of the dinner. My future felt the same. Protected, deliberate, undeniable. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out the disownment papers. I didn't reread them. They didn't deserve that final insult. Instead, I folded the sheets neatly. The disownment papers were a piece of history, the definitive, notarized end of a relationship. I placed them behind the framed copy of my newly printed university degree. It was a quiet, almost ceremonial gesture, not hidden out of shame, not honored out of respect, but simply placed in order. Evidence of the moment they let go of me, and the exact moment I finally let go of them. The frame now contained my academic validation and the physical proof of the severing, a complete narrative of my exit. I made a cup of herbal tea, the steam rising in gentle, comforting spirals. For the first time, my apartment didn't feel lonely. It felt like mine. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Serafina. I still didn't open it. Some things aren't meant to be answered. Some things are meant to echo into silence, a void where nothing matters anymore. I moved to the window and watched the endless grid of the city stretching into the distance, lights blinking in a rhythm of relentless, purposeful activity. People were moving, living, building, unfolding without hesitation. In the glass, I saw my reflection, not the forgotten daughter, not the shadow of Serafina Vance, but a woman who had walked out of a room designed to suffocate her and had simply continued to breathe. Families break loudly, yes, but peace is rebuilt quietly, brick by brick. They thought they had ended our relationship, but what I had really done was end their power. And in the quiet aftermath of that victory, I realized that the greatest achievement wasn't the $15.5 million. It was the ability to stand there completely alone and feel utterly, wonderfully whole. The sheer, staggering silence that fell over the Vance table was more potent than any outburst. It was the sound of a carefully constructed reality shattering. They had come prepared to deliver a verdict, but they ended up receiving one. My thank you, followed by the presentation of the Apex Logistics folder, wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a declaration of war, a war I had already won, financed by $15.5 million they didn't know existed. I watched their faces as they processed the information. Victoria's initial shock quickly morphed into a desperate, frantic scramble for control. She reached for the contract, her hands shaking, her expression a mix of awe and pure, transactional panic. A director? Eleanor, why would you sign this without consulting your father? He could have negotiated a much higher equity stake. This is amateur work. Darling, leaving money on the table. Her concern wasn't for me, but for the potential capital the Vance family had missed out on. That, more than the disownment itself, was the clearest window into their soul. I didn't consult him because I knew his advice would come with a price tag, I said, the quiet levelness of my voice cutting through her frantic energy. The price of control, the price of your approval, and the price of staying in the family fold. I chose the money I earned over the money that came with strings. Charles, however, was worse. The disbelief in his eyes was replaced by a look of calculated admiration, the kind he usually reserved for a rival CEO who had blindsided him with a brilliant, brutal move. He tapped the acquisition agreement with a manicured nail, his mind already churning the numbers. Apex Logistics, he murmured, almost to himself. Elias Thorne is a visionary. $15.5 million and a director role. This isn't just a graduate hire, Eleanor. This is a strategic acquisition. You are the asset. The moment he called me the asset, my stomach turned. He was finally seeing me, but only through the lens of profitability. Serafina, finally regaining her composure, tried the emotional angle. She pushed the papers away, dramatically. But, money isn't everything. We're your family. This is devastating for Mother. How could you be so cruel? Cruel. I almost smiled. Serafina, you are recording my expected breakdown for your social media. You were complicit in a legally binding document designed to sever every thread of connection. You taught me the rules of this household. Results matter. Emotional investment is weakness. I learned the lesson. I delivered the result. I found a way to measure my own worth in a currency you respect. I gestured to the disownment papers. You handed me this severance package. I just provided a better retirement plan for myself. The irony was the final nail. They had wanted to kick me out into the cold, expecting me to crawl back, broken and begging for a small allowance. Instead, I had shown them a ticket to a world they couldn't touch, a deal so lucrative they could only look on in envy. I stood up, the chair scraping softly against the marble floor. You taught me how to operate in silence, Father, I concluded, looking directly into Charles's pale, defeated eyes. You taught me that if something isn't profitable, it's disposable. By giving me this document, you gave me the freedom to pursue the highest possible ROI, my own happiness and my own success, free of the Vance name. Thank you for signing the divorce papers on our relationship. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go prepare for my first day as a director. I turned my back on the table, their shock still hanging in the air. The final lesson was delivered, not with a lecture, but with the quiet, confident click of my heels echoing out of the room. The air outside the Aurelia was the first real, unpolluted breath I had taken in 22 years. It was the moment I realized that for all their wealth and all their power, the Vances had been the ones suffocating, trapped beneath their own weight of expectation and pride. I walked the first few blocks, no longer feeling the need for an adrenaline high, but settling into a profound, steady calm. I was free. I made it back to my apartment and immediately placed the gray portfolio on my desk, not on the counter, but precisely in the center, where it belonged. It was the physical representation of my autonomy. Then I took out the disownment papers. They were just paper now, their power utterly neutralized. I opened the frame that held my graduation certificate, slipped the disownment document neatly behind it, and closed the frame again. It was my final, silent ritual, a reminder that the moment I was legally expelled from their lives was the very moment I became a self-made woman. The certificate represented my beginning, the papers behind it the final, permanent ending. I brewed a cup of tea, the gentle steam a domestic, comforting contrast to the cold, corporate theater I had just left. My phone lay on the counter. Serafina's texts continued, morphing from panic to manipulative pleading. "Eleanor, we can make this work. Mother is distraught. Please call father back." I didn't open them. I didn't even need to. The knowledge that they were experiencing the consequences of their actions was enough. I sat by the window, looking at the city. The lights weren't just random flickers anymore. They represented millions of individual, purposeful lives, each one building, striving, and connecting. I realized that my family had been a relentless, beautiful noise that had drowned out the entire world. And tonight I had muted them. My achievement, I thought, wasn't just the money or the title. It was the proof of concept that value is not assigned by a familial hierarchy, but earned through quiet, persistent work. I had been taught by the best, most ruthless business minds that only results matter, and I delivered the results of a lifetime in a single, unanswerable counteroffer. I didn't need to win their love. I only needed to win my freedom, and that I had achieved in spectacular fashion. If you've listened to my story, you might recognize a part of yourself in it. The part that feels unseen, underestimated, or consistently measured by someone else's narrow metrics. Maybe your Vance family is a toxic boss, a critical relative, or even the self-doubt you carry around. My advice is simple, and it's the one thing that saved me. Work in the silence. Don't announce your efforts, announce your results. Let the people who underestimate you believe your achievements are accidents, strokes of luck, or mere hobbies. While they are busy looking at the surface, you should be building the foundation. The conviction you gain from achieving something entirely on your own, free from the noise of external validation, will become the most valuable asset you own. It's the one thing they can never acquire, never control, and never take away. Families break loudly, but true strength, true self-worth is built in the quiet. I walked out of that room not because I had money, but because I had self-possession. I had ended their power, and in doing so, I finally started to live my own life. What is the quiet project you're working on right now? What is the unseen strength you're building that will one day become your loudest success? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. Thank you for listening to mine.